What's up, Sales RXers? Welcome to this week's episode. If you've been following my content for some time, you know that I'm a huge fan of storytelling and sales. I'm a huge fan of it because what it can do is create some urgency and also give your prospects some FOMO and make them act by association. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, when we think about storytelling and sales, essentially what we're doing is we're painting a current state and then a future state and then talking about the metamorphosis in between. And what it does is it allows us to show our prospects that, hey, you might have an idea of what you want to have happen. You might have an idea of where you're at. But by me showing you how other people in your role, in your industry, were in this stage and became this stage, this is what they thought they wanted. What they thought they wanted is actually the desire that we showed them what they wanted. And that's a simple before and after bridge framework in storytelling in sales that a lot of people leverage. That said, I decided to bring in some extra hands to help and talk through this on today's episode, which is why I was joined by Nick Capozzi. He is the head of storytelling at DemoStack. He's got incredible LinkedIn content, incredible TikTok content. He's a thought leader in the space. And so we took the next 15 minutes to really break down storytelling in sales, what it means, and how to do it to some effect. So let's dive right in. And don't forget, stick around to the end of the episode for a special offer. In terms of storytelling and sales across all levels, whether I'm an SDR making a cold call, I'm an AE in discovery, or I'm even an AE working with my SE in a demo, how does storytelling and sales work versus like what are the other things people do besides storytelling and sales? Like what's the adverse of that? What do we see instead of
feature dumping?
Yeah.
Right? Which seems really simple. But what's amazing is if I give you a piece of data, Chet, you're not going to remember that. But if I tell you a really great story and really pull you into the conversation, you're more likely to remember it, A, but then B, you're more likely to bring it back to other stakeholders on your team and tell the story the way that I want you to tell it.
Mm-hmm. What is the do you use a framework for storytelling?
I think it depends. So if I was taking on a new sales team today, if I was coming in as a new sales leader, I would look at my product or service and I would look at my personas. That's where I'd start. And I would start to have conversations with my current sellers and say, let's talk out situations with these different personas. And then I would take notes and I would start to develop a framework to build out that story. I think one of the most important things when it does come to telling stories, Chet, is, and this is almost universal, we keep making about us, our product, our service, our solution, as opposed to the pain point that the prospect has. And if you tell a really good story around their pain point, one, you get them excited about it. And if you get them excited, you're more likely to get velocity through the sales cycle.
Yeah. Helps build that urgency before there's urgency to get them to sign. Gets them urgent to take that next step and see what's next.
Nailed it.
I mean, it makes sense, right? You watch the pilot episode of Breaking Bad, you're like, I gotta watch the second one. You know what I mean? That's what I think. I think of sales as episodes, really. Like, it's like episode 1, here we go, cold call, what's going on? Episode 2, here's the discovery call. Why are we back?
I had to sit through 3 or 4 episodes before I really got into the show.
Yeah.
But by that 4th demo, I was ready to buy.
But that's how it works, right? Think about pilot series. The Office had 6 episodes. And they didn't even know if they were going to get renewed for a season 2. But then season 2 went off the charts, and it was like, it takes a little bit of time to get in. I feel like the same way about Parks and Rec. It took me like 3 episodes to really get bought in and see this is not The Office, it's its own thing. Especially in a world where it's competitive, right? I think that you would probably agree that if you're here telling a good story to your prospect, they're probably like, wow, I didn't hear any of that from the other people that I'm evaluating, you know? So it helps you stand out a little bit.
It does help you stand out. And one thing, I will plant my flag on this hill, that the reality is that, you know, if you're selling widgets, there's 9 other companies trying to sell that same, very similar widget to the prospect. We each have a little bit of a different hook on it, but at the reality, we're all selling the same widget. So if you tell a great story and you really pull people in, what you do is you're more likely to build a champion on that side, and you might jump up into the top 3 automatically because, again, a lot of it's similar, so you're more likely to get farther in the sales cycle, even if there's other competitors.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to ask you something interesting because one thing I'm trying to get out of on the podcast is also just talking a lot about what and why. I want to talk a little bit about how, because I want people to walk away with tactical information. I think we got some good nuggets here, but if I'm a seller, whether I'm an SDR, BDR, an AE, or an SE, because they're still in sales. Everybody, remember, SE still have a part of the sales process. Don't forget about that. They are selling when they are running the demo with you, unless you're in a company where the SE is just there to scope technical stuff. But regardless, right? I digress. I may or may not have a marketing team that has built out all my personas with a story behind it. I may have people on my team, if I'm 3 months into a company, that can tell me about stories that they tell, or listen to their demos or their discovery calls or their cold calls and understand these stories. But I guess what's the catch-all for someone to start learning how to tell stories? Like, where do I start if I'm like, I want to be a storyteller in sales? What do I do other than like finding education online? Like, how can I do that internally at my company, regardless of what resources I may or may not have? What's a way for me to be successful to just provide myself a foundation?
I love that question. There's two great ways to do it. One is start looking at your case studies. Case studies that your marketing team has put together, and dig into those. What was the pain point? What was the solution? I think when we talk about storytelling, we think too much about like Disney-fying it, right? Like it's got to be this huge arc and hero's journey. It doesn't have to be. Case study is a great example of a way to start telling better stories. But when I sit in on demos, I rarely see that. The opportunity where I'm selling an accounting product to a CFO. And you know what? We actually had another CFO recently who had a very similar problem, and go through that story and their pain points before they met you, when they met you, and after they met you. Think of that as a story arc. So that's a great way to do it. The other really key thing, and this is very tactical, I love this piece of actionable insight. When we tell stories, especially as technical sellers, we get very technical in the details. So don't think of the technical verbiage as being, think of technical verbiage as nice to have, but think of vivid imagery, right? And what I mean by that is, I'll challenge you, after you're done work today, go out for a walk in your neighborhood and tell me what you see. What does that tree look like that you're walking past? What's the color of the bark? Literally, what color is that bark? Is the bark flaking off? Is it curling up like the end of a ski tip, right? What do the leaves look like? If you're in Florida, maybe they're wide and waxy looking, tropical looking. Maybe if you're in Colorado, they're drier and more brittle, right? But using those words, those vivid images to describe things, I think is crucial. And I'll tie this into something else we do. We use a lot of crutch words when we're doing presentations or demos. So what are those words that are amazing and exciting? Because if everything's amazing and exciting, then nothing is amazing and exciting. So thesaurus.com is another great tip. Go through those words, those crutch words that you're repeatedly saying, and find better words, right? Find more descriptive imagery. But if you think of that, like literally painting a picture, what does that look like? What does that sound like? What does it smell like? What does it feel like, right? That's evoking emotion, and you're going to get that from vivid imagery.
So I want your feedback on this. Storytelling works because, like you said, your point of contact can take that back to other decision makers. You're interrupting patterns. They're going to remember you more. Do you think part of that has to do with the emotion that's created from that vivid imagery? Because if you think of like a great movie you watch, like I just recently watched The Revenant with Leo DiCaprio for the first time. I hadn't seen it since I hadn't ever seen it, but I was like, I can't believe I've never seen this movie. I was like afraid for half that movie, like just because of the way it was shot, and it is very vivid and it's very real. Do you think spurring emotion has a part to play in the storytelling that we do in sales that kind of helps move people down the funnel faster and more effectively?
That's exactly what it does. Exactly what it does. Well, let's talk about that movie, right? The scene where the bear is over top of him, right? Yeah. What is that? That was that whole movie, which was a great movie. When the bear is attacking him is when I was most locked in, and I'm feeling that fear for the actor, for Leonardo in that moment. And the bear is over top of him, right? In his face. You can feel the warmth, the heat from the bear's breath. You can see it, as it clouds over in the winterscape, right? And then let's get into that, right? So Leonardo DiCaprio is pinned down by this massive bear on this huge white field, right? So all those things, you just brought up that movie, and that brought me right back to that one particular scene, and that resonated with me because it was so emotional, that scene, right? It pulled me right back to that moment, right?
Even the fact that, like, 15 minutes into the movie, I could tell like I pulled a blanket on myself, and I'm in Los Angeles, right? I think you're in Arizona, right? So like we're not like in the Midwest where we're freezing cold right now, but it has gotten significantly colder. But I felt like I was in the Arctic halfway through that movie. I'm like pulling a blanket on because I'm cold, because you're seeing his breath all the time and the snow's falling on him and he's rolling around in ice cold river water and stuff, and you're like, geez, that's really cold. You know what I mean? Like it's just so beautiful how that's created. I'm so why don't a lot of, I feel like, because I've been on a lot of demos lately, man. I've been helping companies evaluate software. I probably sat on 38
Same.
demos in the last quarter. Yeah, exactly right. But it's like I have maybe met one person who actually stuck out in my head as a seller, and I just feel personally like it's because sales leaders and individual contributors are not putting enough emphasis on storytelling. Why are we not doing a good enough job in sales of making this a priority? What is affecting us from going, hey, this should be like a division of our training, something that we focus on, something that we expect to inspect from our reps? What's the holdup?
The holdup is that everything's been done the same way in SaaS for 20 years, right? The processes are all the same. I mean, it's rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. Yeah, new ideas come up, we get excited about them, but there's so much that's the same. I came from a very different B2C background before I got into B2B tech. And that was one of the first things I noticed was everything was a clone of everything else. Everything was the same, right? So I think because we've sold these technical products in a technical way for so long, the reality is there's way more tools out there now, right? If I want to use a video tool, 5 years ago, I had maybe one as an option. Today, I might have dozens. So I think it's important to realize that as there's more competition, because especially with like no code and stuff, it's a lot easier to build tools. A lot of people are out there, building tools in their basement, or at least that's where they start. So I think, because we've templated everything for so long, storytelling just kind of wasn't important. But I think now that's a great way to differentiate from those dozen other tools that are also being examined by the buyer.
Yeah. And I like how you called out that framework earlier, which just going back to that made me think it was kind of like current state. This is where people were before we started working with them. Working state. This is the kind of stuff we did with them. And then future state. This is the outcome that they experience. I think you were talking about a CEO when you were talking about doing the demo. I think that's even important to understand if you're a listener, that you can do that as an SDR or a full cycle AE if you're doing outreach, right? Hey, as a VP of sales, we know that in an economic downturn, this is going on right now. This is how we're able to assist, and the problems that we kind of solve, or the key problem that we solve for based on what I can tell. And this is some of the outcomes that we've seen, maybe even a better way to use that case study instead of just firing it off, linking it in that email so somebody's actually interested in reading further what you're talking about, which I think was really cool that you called out, and very, very applicable to anybody in any role. Even if you're a manager and you're trying to sell someone on a new idea of a process that you had to do that might, hey, this is the new note template. Yeah, it's going to be a little bit more work, but here's why, right? This is why we're implementing it. This is why it's important to tell that story so people are more bought in, you get more adoption, and you see more enactment faster.
You nailed it, right?
Nick, if what have we not talked about that you think is important as we close out the episode regarding storytelling in sales? What have I not asked you that you think the listeners need to hear?
You know what my answer is, Chet? It's a lot easier than you think. And I know I'm not layering on to what we talked about, but telling a great story is not that difficult. And I think the halo effect of learning to tell great stories is that you won't just use them in a B2B sales cycle.
Yeah.
You'll help tell great stories when you're trying to convince your wife what you want for dinner is the best option. Yeah. Right? So I think that there's a lot of ways that it layers into your day-to-day, not just in a demo or in your sales motion. So telling a great story is a craft. But just think about it. When you're reading a great book, why do you get pulled in? Because they're really creating vivid imagery. They really make you feel like you're there. And if you want to win at telling a story, what you're trying to do is pull that person on the other side of the table into the theater, into the show with you on stage. And if you accomplish that, you build a champion and you get much faster deal velocity.
Yeah. I love that. Nick, this has been really insightful and very informative. We don't get a lot of great storytellers on here talking about storytelling and sales specifically, so I appreciate you taking the time to do so. If people want to engage with you, where can they find you and where can they watch your content?
LinkedIn, for sure, if you want to engage with me personally. And then, if any of this resonated, we talk a lot about everything kind of in the sales cycle, but a lot around storytelling at Demo Stack on our LinkedIn page. That's where a lot of our content lives.
Awesome. And to all of the Sales RXers, first-time listeners and repeat listeners, we will have links to all the resources in the show notes below, as well as a link to Nick's LinkedIn. That's always a tongue twister when I say a link to the LinkedIn. It's always a tough one. We appreciate everybody's time listening to this episode, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks, Nick. What's up, Sales RXers? Thank you for listening to today's episode. We really appreciate you giving us the time in your day to listen to this week's installment, and I hope you found it insightful. That said, I did make a promise at the beginning of the episode that if you stuck all the way through, we would have a special offer for you, and we do. Now listen up, if you're anything like me, you know that social selling is critical to you and your team's success. It's not just enough to cold call and cold email anymore. You have to be doing something different to stand out from the crowd. Now that said, we spend a lot of time here at the Sales Doctor prospecting and social selling on LinkedIn, and it's very challenging. You have to get information to and from your CRM, track LinkedIn conversations, get prospect data. Next thing you know, you're 5 tools deep and you're spending all your time in this massive cross-reference of data and information. You're stepping on people's toes on different accounts with different contacts. You're messing things up. It's a pain in the butt. That's why I've partnered with Surf. They allow you to float your CRM on top of your prospects' LinkedIn profiles with a bilateral sync of not only activity and information related to your contact, but also they help you find your contact's information directly from LinkedIn. So if I go to a company's page that I'm prospecting and I want to find their head of sales and have a conversation, I don't need to manage a bunch of different tools. I can go exactly to his or her LinkedIn profile. I can add that contact to my CRM directly from LinkedIn. And I can also find their phone number and their email using Surf. The great thing is later on when one of my reps wants to go have a conversation with that head of sales, they can see any activity that I've had, that I'm the owner of the account, the life cycle of the lead or the contact. All the information from the CRM is back on the LinkedIn view. It allows us to sell more effectively and spend more time doing what we want to do, which is having sales conversations. So I partnered with Surf, and they're giving a heck of an offer. In the show description, you'll find a link to download a free 14-day trial of their premium version of Surf. This is a tool that companies pay upwards of $400 per year, per rep, per seat, and you get it for free for 2 weeks with 25 email finder credits. That's right. If you go to the link in the show description now and download the free 14-day premium trial of Surf, you will also be given 25 email finder credits as well. This way you can start prospecting and social selling on LinkedIn without having to navigate between multiple tools. So go in the show description, click on the link, download Surf today, let me know what you think, and we'll see you on next week's episode.